good evening, and welcome to a special episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. Tonight, we will be talking about all things Trek as we give a look back at the history of Star Trek since we are coming up on the anniversary of the very first episode of Star Trek, which aired on September 8th, 1966. I am one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. You can find the Fire Caves on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as the Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. And yeah, Star Trek Day. What's up with that, huh?
Absolutely. We've been doing this now for a couple of years, whenever the anniversary and stuff comes around. And, last year we were very fortunate in the fact that it fell actually, on a Saturday and there was a bunch of stuff that we could do with it. I think we actually missed it our very first year that we were doing the show. But now, it's, as things do with dates, it's moved on. So actually, when this episode is released, it will be on actual Star Trek Day, but we're recording it a day early so that it will, we'll have it. But so if you're here live with us, of course, you get to hear everything, now. But just so you know, that's what the situation is. But yeah, we are looking at nearly 60 years of Star Trek, from TV shows to comic books to movies to all kinds of different incarnations and iterations of this incredible franchise, all stemming from one show that almost didn't happen, almost didn't go beyond its 3-season run. Um, yeah, it's an amazing show, and it's really kind of a rare phenomenon when you consider television shows in particular. Very few shows have had this kind of um, longevity, staying power, influence that Star Trek has had, and we're going to go over that while we also talk about some of our favorite moments, some of our not so favorite moments, some things that are a bit contemporary as we seem to be going through them right now, and everything else in between. So stay with us, and I hope that you enjoy the episode that we give you tonight. But before we dive into all that, we of course like to do our weekly check-in. So, David, how has your week been?
Week was okay. Work was weird. Labor Day weekend is supposed to be a big weekend in the mattress industry, and I had coworkers who did well, but my store did not. It was a little frustrating. I did today though. It was a Saturday, about a week after. Did have a pretty good day in like a delayed response to the weekend, which was interesting. But the real thing that was interesting for me this week, well, first off, I should mention I found out this week there are three shows that had a fantastic first season in the last couple of years that I realize are all about to have a second season here soon. Um, the show Arcane, which is the League of Legends inspired show. It's funny. I re-listened to the podcast we did a couple of years ago that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I mentioned having just watched the first season in our that podcast. It was our episode 60. If you want to go back and listen to episode 60 of our show, the past tense part one, I mentioned Arcane and how it was a great show, and looking forward to season two. The other show in November is Silo. Silo is about to have a second season. I really enjoyed the first season. That's an Apple podcast or an Apple show. The first show is a Netflix show, and then finally, Severance is a show that I also really enjoyed. My parents got me onto it, and I watched the entire first season while I was sick with COVID over the Christmas holiday, I think 2022. So shortly after that episode we had recorded, I watched the first season of Severance. That's a fantastic show, another Apple original show. If any of those, if you need something to watch, those shows are amazing. So looking forward to season two of all those shows. But the one thing I did this week was while I was getting my breaks checked, I did read the short story in the Memories Legion short story compilation for the Expanse called Strange Dogs, which was adapted during season 6 of the show. The little girl, I forget her name at the moment, but on what's the planet? Lyria or Ilium. Um,
Oh,
what's that? You
I'm
remember it?
trying to think of the name of this. I was trying to think of the name of the planet, but go ahead.
Yeah. I'll pull it up real quick. But anyway, Kara, the little girl with the Martian fleet on Ilium, I think it is. I forget what it's called at the moment. I can't believe I'm forgetting.
Illis, right?
Laconia, that's it, Laconia. Anyway, in the show, the little girl, she finds these strange creatures that basically
Oh, yes.
revive both a dead alien bird. They fix a drone that she has, and then they revive her dead brother. Her 9-year-old brother gets killed in a freak car accident on a foreign alien planet, and these creatures are somehow able to use what is clearly the protomolecule to revive her dead brother. What's really great about that short story, it was only 50 pages, and I was reading it while I was getting my breaks done this week. So it was a perfect amount of time to finish. It was literally just the amount of time I needed to read the short story and get my breaks done. And it is absolutely spot on in the show. Like, you literally would not have to read the short story to appreciate the story if you watch the show. So it was fun to read it just to get basically the original version. It's all from her perspective. So you get basically the first person perspective as opposed to the third person perspective in the show. But it literally is the same beat for beat, same storyline. Nothing's different. There's maybe a little more embellishment that the book can do because it's just right there. But yeah, I did that, and then also starting last year and again this year, I think I'm gonna try and like read a book about 9/11 around the time of 9/11, and so 9/11 is coming up here in a few days. The book I'm reading right now is called "The Only Plane in the Sky." It's described as a oral retelling of the events of 9/11. So it's mostly just quotes of people and what they experienced throughout the day. And pretty powerful stuff. I get teary eyed, losing tears listening to some of the stories that happened that day. Pretty brutal. I was a sixth grader at the time, so I remember it pretty vividly for what it was at the time. Dude, I love I mentioned this last time I talked about it last year. I read the 9/11 Commission report as like a high schooler. Whenever they came out with the 9/11
Whoa.
report, I was that into it. I was like, I'm gonna read this, and I don't remember how much I remember of it. How well I retained it, but I remember having a copy and like reading it as like a 12-year-old. So anyway, yeah, that's what I did this week. How about you?
Well, I didn't do that. My week hasn't been bad or anything like that. Just been kind of very much a lot of the same. We're kind of falling into our routine here as the school year, goes full swing. Of course, we've had to deal with the fact that there was yet another school shooting in the United States. We had that one in Georgia, and of course, this means that the schools here began practicing, their various, shelter in place drills and notification drills, and you're getting letters and stuff from concerned principals and vice principals and parents and PTA members and everything else about what we're doing to keep your child safe and stuff like that. And then of course there is this movement right now to ban cell phones in schools. So we're kind of dealing with that because the argument is basically that the students are, for lack of a better term, addicted to their phones, and it's causing issues with trying to get curriculum taught and lessons gotten through and things like that. So they want to remove phones from the school. However, there is a major pushback on that because of the fact that we do have school shootings, and typically one of the first ways that police or anyone else is alerted to the school shooting is a student using their phone and getting that information out. So um, trying to find the right balance between what we can do to keep the kids safe and to get knowledge out when necessary, get information out when necessary, versus unduly influencing classwork and students and like that is very hard. So not really sure where everybody's going to come down on that, and at least in um, my child's school district, but um, I know that for me personally, I did not want to send my kid to school with a phone, but being, this is the reality in which we live in, I was just like, I can't not send her without there being some way for her to contact me. So I don't know how I feel about them if they suddenly say no phones in school. I mean, they're not willing to do any kind of restriction or ban on weapons seemingly, at least at this time, so it's just like don't cut off the one tool that unfortunately does seem to work. Students being able to call, send a message. That seems to be how we find out about these things first. If you go back and you look at a lot of school students, especially ones that have been in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, typically the way that police are notified is not because a teacher or from some, school plan or anything like that. It's typically because a student had their phone in class and sent a message to someone that got the ball rolling. So
Right.
yeah, so we're dealing with that now, and of course I have other thoughts like should I just take my kid out of school entirely and all that kind of stuff. But we'll see as meetings continue, as PTAs and stuff. We do meetings and all that other kind of stuff, and what the school board wants to do and propose and all that kind of stuff. We'll see how we go on that. I just know it's not something that I particularly love to talk about or obsess over or anything like that. But of course, it's my kid, so I do.
Right.
Um, but we're not here to talk about all those things. We are here to talk about all things Trek. 58 years ago, Sunday, the very first episode of Star Trek premiered. A pilot featuring Captain Christopher Pike, not Captain James T. Kirk, was aired. Shortly after that, we got another pilot, which did feature um, Captain Kirk, and everybody, basically all the original officers with Pike were replaced except for Spock, and the show as we know it went on from there. Um, have you watched much of the original series?
I still have not. No. I mean, we talk often enough about things from the original show that I should get around to watching it. Frankly, um, maybe. I mean, like I said, I have some shows I'm looking forward to here in the next couple months, so maybe I won't have time for it just yet. But maybe once those are done, I'll pick up the original series and finally get around to watching it.
That's the beauty of the original series. I mean, it's only 3 seasons long, and as I said before, it's kind of one of those anomaly series. It lasted for 3 years. It almost didn't get the third season. That was all done through a write-in campaign from the fans of the show that saved it for that third and final season. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to breeze through, and it's got a lot of surprising notes in it. And what I mean by that is, for a show of its time, there are a lot of things in it that can come off as pretty heady, complex stuff, which always is interesting because when you first start watching the show, it doesn't initially seem that way. But then as you get into it, they do a lot for the 3 seasons that it's out there. And then of course, it was, off the air and there was no Star Trek. And then Star Trek came back in a really big way in the 70s, which seems to have been like a sci-fi explosion, at least here in the United States. This led, of course, to several movies and another series, Star Trek The Next Generation, which came out in the 80s. And as much as the original series was a, ahead of its time, trailblazing show, Next Generation really kind of took that and turned it on its ear and became the pinnacle show that would really help to not just stabilize the franchise, but also give it new life and help a lot of other things, a lot of other shows branch off from it. From
Right.
Next Generation, we get Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and even Discovery and Strange New Worlds owe a lot of their existence to the fact that the Next Generation was such a successful and critically acclaimed show. So, with that, like I said, there have been a lot of different spin-offs, as it's mentioned here. The one that's known as TAS, which is the animated series, which you know I never know what to really think of the animated series because on the one hand, the stories can be really interesting on it, but it's just so campy and cartoonish that it almost is like it's making fun of itself.
Uh-huh.
And the action and the way that things are animated back then, it's so blocky and bad, and it's a lot to get past to actually get to enjoy a lot of those shows, but it's possible.
Right.
I finally did sit through all the episodes of the animated series, maybe maybe 2 years ago, I think. And yeah, once you get past the awful blockiness of it and the fact that several different motions are reused again and again, not just from episode to episode, but even within the episode, several things are reused. Once you get past a lot of that, it actually can be a lot of fun. So.
Okay, nice.
So, since you haven't seen much of the original series, just want to um, quickly recap there a little bit of history for us. As I said, the original series featuring our our three main characters. If you want to say a show had three, it would definitely be this one, and that was Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. We have the rest of the crew kind of forming this ensemble before it was really an ensemble cast. They really did help kind of to round things out, but they weren't really looked at that way until really a lot later in Star Trek, like in particular the movies. The original series cast had 6 movies together, and you really did see the other characters kind of come to life and get some more depth and complexity through the movies, not so much on the show. As I said earlier, Spock was the only character to survive the chop block when it came to the original pilot. But those characters, while gone, were never totally forgotten, and now we see them getting new life here again, nearly 60 years later on Strange New Worlds with. The character Captain Christopher Pike back once again in command of the USS Enterprise and his crew now getting their own fleshing out after all these decades. So I really do like the way that they have um, given us something that is both canon and new because they were able to do that. Um, but I mean, I don't know. I guess it's not enough to say whether or not these characters are like true to form because technically we never really saw them on anything, you know. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's
That
still an
weird gray
interesting thing
zone.
to, yeah, and I feel like that's one of the things that Star Trek has learned to do very well when it comes to reaching back into their history and bringing stuff forward. It's been, I feel like that would be a challenge really for any show, especially with one that has so much of a history and a following the way that Trek does. But they continue to do it well with most things. They retcon some other things, and I'm just like, why, looking at you, Discovery Klingons. But other than that, they do a pretty good job, I would say. um well, before I get into anything else, I just want to ask you, since you have not seen it, is there anything about that particular show that when you do hear references or anything like that that come up, is there anything that you always are kind of like, what is that, or that's ever just kind of stood out to you in that way?
Uh, no. I mean, I guess the reason I haven't ever gone back and watched the original show is because I've frankly just been worried that it's going to be so campy and so I don't know, so much thing of its era that it'll just be hard to watch. Frankly,
I completely understand, and I will 100% agree and say that for a lot of people, they feel that way. I
right,
felt that way for a long time. I always felt like it's just what you have to get through because it is the original.
right,
There's even an argument that out there right now that you could almost say that that show isn't a part of uh the rest of canon Trek because
right,
all the other shows take place in the same century and they build off of each other so well, and that show doesn't. You could almost say that it exists in its own little box universe there and stands apart from everything else, so you
right.
would be okay to miss it. um but I still feel like
Yeah,
you
I
should
feel
watch
like
it.
at this point, having talked with you and knowing, like we've watched the episode "The Trouble with Tribbles," which, like, now I understand part of what that episode was about, but I don't have the full context 'cause I haven't seen the original episode.
Mhm.
Um, so I do feel at this point, like, even out of obligation, and not obligation like, oh god, I got to do this. More like a reverent obligation to the original series. I feel like on some level I should do it just to, even if it's to say that I've done it, but
Mhm.
not in a okay I've done it, but like yeah I have done it.
Yeah.
I feel like that is something I'll do at some point. I don't plan on doing it right away, but yeah, I think at some point here, probably a little bit later. By the time we finish our recording of Deep Space Nine, I don't think it'd be impossible to say that I have finally found time to go watch the original series. We'll see what happens, but yeah,
Well, the way in which we treat those characters, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Uhura, Sulu, so forth and so on. I mean, it's one of those, they've achieved such an extreme legendary status that even within the Star Trek universe, whenever those characters are brought up, the reverence that's paid to those characters every time. Even on the Next Generation, when Spock showed up for the infamous two-parter episode in the Next Generation dealing with the Romulans, it was such a big deal to have, not just Spock, but Leonard Nimoy back as Spock and taking on this major role for the show. When
right,
Scotty turned back up for the episode Relics, again, such, you know, almost like everybody was genuflecting when he walked by, because of who he was. And then, in the first season, when a very, very old Admiral McCoy is escorted by first season Data down a corridor, and they're talking again. There's such a reverence placed on the moment. But then you go back and you actually watch them in their heyday, in their prime, and especially considering how that show was filmed. Every time I watch it, I always think the phrase "never meet your heroes." Because sometimes they do things. I'm just like, come on,
yeah,
come on, yeah, that didn't make any sense, and so. But it's still, I still feel like it's one of those things. Like, even with that being said, you probably do need to watch it just so that you can feel, and again, just feel fully informed on the universe that you've been watching. And all of the shows make references to those characters to this day.
right.
They
Oh yeah,
all make references to them. So it's never going to go away. So I feel like you might as well just, get that notch in your belt and
exactly.
have fun with it.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
No, I do think that the one that probably we're the most familiar with, not just because of, our own podcast, but it was the one that would have been on the majority of the time of our lives, and that would be, Star Trek: The Next Generation, featuring, Captain Picard, Data, Geordi, Riker, Worf, so forth and so on. Show ran for 7 seasons, came out in 1986, I believe, winner of various TV awards, Saturn Awards. I think it won. I don't know if they ever won an Emmy. I have to check on that. But again, just a very timely show that also dealt with a lot of critical issues, but it had probably one of the best developed writing crews out of any of the shows, even since. Like, I know that a lot of Trek that we have now, they've got some great one-offs, but to consistently hit it out of the park with your episodes season to season to season was already very rare, and yet Next Generation did it successfully. For I'll give them I'll give them a very generous 5 of the 7 seasons. Um, I think everybody's first season of any show is always just a step up from garbage. You might get a couple of gems in there, but for the most part, it's very rocky. You've got actors who've never played those roles before, working with writers and directors that they've probably never encountered. And especially as we go on in the other shows, the actors got younger and younger. Um, you know, with the Next Generation, Patrick Stewart was, I think they said he was 49 when Next Generation started. So, and then when Cisco comes along in Deep Space Nine, he was 39, if I remember
Okay.
correctly.
Okay.
So yeah, and when you have people like Patrick Stewart coming into it, who are severely disciplined, trained, experienced actors who come into a show like this, it is going to set a completely different tone, which is something that all the actors from on Next Generation have talked about in great detail. Just how serious Patrick Stewart was, and how he how serious he took the job, and the role of Jean-Luc Picard, and almost to his own detriment. They talk about not liking him very much in the first season, whereas the rest of the crew, being very young and relatively inexperienced, most of them had only had maybe 2 to 3, you consider them big jobs before Next Generation. They were kind of you know like college kids who had just graduated,
Right.
and they're all still kind of in that kind of senioritis party mode to a degree. And they talk about it was a bit of a laugh fest for them most of the time. They put their feet up on props and were just lounging about and telling jokes and pulling pranks and all this kind of stuff. And then Patrick would walk on and he was just so serious, and they really had to break him out of it. And thankfully they did, because I couldn't imagine the show without him,
Oh,
without Patrick Stewart being Jean-Luc Picard, the most
right.
British Frenchman I've ever seen in my entire life.
Oh, that's so true. Sir Patrick Stewart.
Sir
Frenchman
Patrick Stewart. Oh man. So now I know that you have seen a lot of Next Generation. In fact, you were already watching Next Generation before we started doing our show, and then you really kind of kicked it into gear to uh, be finished with Next Gen, because I know there was a little bit of an overlap there for you at one point doing our
Yeah,
show
so
and that one.
when we agreed that you and I would do this show, the Fire Caves, which I still haven't yet come across exactly why you chose that title yet. We're
It's
still
coming.
6.5
It's coming.
seasons in. Anyway,
If
um,
there's one thing we can say about Deep Space Nine, they love to bury the lead. So it's coming. We'll get there.
so you and I had agreed that I needed to, in order to know where Cisco's story was going to be and where it
Where
made
it began,
sense,
right?
we needed to watch what was it, the best of both worlds? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
The 2-part season finale slash season 4 opener. So basically, I blasted through the first 3 seasons to make sure I got there, and then continued watching. And I don't know if blasting through it is quite right, either before or after, but certainly. I mean, to make sure I got done in a decent time, I did watch those first 3 seasons at a bit of a clip, but I don't think I stopped the clip afterward. I kept watching. Uh, so yeah, during the first season or so of Deep Space Nine, I was watching the rest of TNG. Yeah.
Right. Now, I don't know if we ever asked this question of you before, but out of Next Generation, who was your favorite character
From the Next Generation.
from Next Generation?
I feel like that's a question that maybe a lot of people say like that's a that's a trick question. It's like depends on the
I,
episode, right?
I will disagree slightly that it's a trick question, but I
But
will
yeah,
say
I know
that
I
it
you
is
know what I
a
mean.
it's a nuanced question, because
True.
I have found that as you get older and the more you watch the episodes, your favorite character tends to change. But in this moment right now, who would you say is your favorite character?
I guess okay, there's two answers to this question. Either it's I don't have one, or it's Picard. But I feel like Picard is kind of like a cop out because it's like, I mean, let me put it this way: Picard is always central in
Um,
TNG. Like
yeah.
I've said before about Deep Space Nine, they don't treat Cisco like they treated Picard. They treated Patrick Stewart like he was the Shakespearean English actor that had prestige. They gave him a commanding role in every episode. Even if it wasn't an episode about him, he still, I mean, he was the captain. He was involved at least in making decisions
Yeah.
about what was going on. And so Picard gets a lot of the fun storylines. He's the one who has to confront people, confront
Hmm.
the Romulans, confront Cardassians. There are four lights, stuff like that. Um, so I would have to say Picard simply because like he is kind of the star, and everyone else, like he's the sun, and the others are planets that revolve around him. Frankly,
Yeah.
so it's like pick your favorite planet. You can't pick the sun. I mean, if that was the choice, if you can't pick Picard, I mean, Data is probably just frankly the most interesting character because he has the most unique. He's the most
Hmm.
unique character, which I know most unique. You can't use that with no. Every character is unique. He was the most unique. I think most unique is a legitimate phrase. Uh, so because Data is trying to figure out what it means to be human. Brett Spiner as the actor who plays him in a very straight, consistent way. Jordy is fun. Frakes as Riker, and you love Riker. Riker's he's masculinity personified. Um,
Yeah, I got a lot to say about good old
oh,
Will the
go
Thrill
ahead,
Riker.
go ahead.
Um,
I'm not trying to
uh, uh,
monopolize the time here or anything. Go ahead.
so as I said, I feel like this is one of those questions that, as you watch the show and as you grow up and have different experiences, that things tend to change. I know that for me, when I was, the very first time I ever watched this show, Worf was the character that I gravitated towards. He was just this very, impressive, strong figure that was different from everyone else, and I like the fact that they were trying to temper the anger, the nearly uncontrollable emotion that he felt with knowledge and experience. That was one of the things that always stood out to me the most about his interactions, in particular with Captain Picard. Picard was always kind of praising Worf for the fact that he, didn't so much deny his Klingon nature, so much as he tempered it with experience, with knowledge, with training, with kind of adapting these things to adapting what we were calling at the time human qualities to fit his own kind of code of ethics and honor. And I don't know why that really stood out to me. Again, I was so little. There was just something about the character that I just really enjoyed.
Right.
As I got older, like I said, I have gone back and forth. Picard, yes, he always kind of comes out on top for a lot of people as a favorite, and I've tried to understand the difference because you're right. We do look at Picard and Cisco differently, and I think that the best way to categorize it is, whereas Cisco is kind of like the dad that you want to be proud of you and to have like on your side and supporting you in a very familial sense. Picard is more like that really great teacher that you had, that
Yeah,
in that
hundred
one
percent.
awesome class, and you always think about that class and the teacher who always gave you life lessons beyond just the class and the material that you were discussing. So now later on in life, the lessons that he taught you, stand out more, not so much because they were part of the curriculum, but because they were the extra things that kind of filled in the gaps and that made the class itself special, and also therefore make that teacher special. We all have that one teacher that we feel like we really kind of connected with and stands out as our favorite. And these kind of they tend to be those reasons. The teachers that didn't give up on us, the teachers that really pushed us and inspired us to do more and to think uh, uh, more broad about ourselves and the world that we're in, things like that. So I feel like
Right.
Picard falls into that category way more than than Cisco does.
Right.
So again, that's why Picard tends to be a favorite. But um, ultimately, at least for me right now, when I think about favorite characters from the Next Generation, Riker is mine at this point because I feel like, considering when this show was airing, which was the mid to late 80s and beyond, he did get that kind of, he's supposed to be the playboy Lothario type who, he gets all the women, whether he's initially interested in them or not, they are interested in him, period, and he kind of comes off as he just wants to be the cool guy playing the jazz. He can do everything, but he's much more personable than Picard, because he gets into stuff like we see him on the holodeck with Worf. We see him again playing Jazz in the holodeck as well. He's got Deanna and their whole relationship, and him and Data have a weird back and forth, and apparently at some point Jordy and Riker had an interaction at the academy and are fast friends. There's no one that Riker doesn't get along with, and that's something that also has its own kind of allure. We want to be that person that everybody feels like, hey, that guy, like when you
Right.
hear his name, you can't help but smile. We all kind of want that about ourselves too. But one thing I've always come to appreciate about Riker is that he is very supportive of the people that he works with, and he's also really good at being a leader and being in command when he needs to, and he doesn't necessarily overrule anyone, unless they really piss him off, like Shelby did in the Best of Both Worlds episode, of course. But he, other than that, he's very good at getting you on his side and wanting to be on his side. And
Right.
he doesn't do it in a way that makes you feel small or like you weren't heard. And I really like that about his just overall style and demeanor. Plus,
Yeah.
he is fun. He's fun. So
He was
yeah.
a great number one to Picard's, captain. Yeah. The
Hmm.
captain has to be obeyed. His authority is absolute. Number one is the guy who might be able to be a little more friendly, a little more nudge nudge. Not so much that you can't obey him, but and I always loved the episodes where Riker would have to take charge because his style was different than Picard. He was
It
not
was and it
Picard
was like
2.0.
instantly different. It was instant.
Yeah.
We didn't have to worry so much about kind of this weird lead up. Now, again, we're talking. We've mentioned, of course, the probably the biggest episode of Next Generation, which is the Best of Both Worlds. This is where Picard is assimilated, and we do see in that episode a hesitancy of Riker to step fully into that command position following the loss of Captain Picard, and that to me was always less about him being. You know, scared to take the role and more about mourning the loss of his friend and mentor, Captain Picard.
Right.
But yeah, he definitely has his own style and his own way of doing things.
Yeah, yeah. It was always great to see him step up because he would do things his own way. But I did want to briefly say before we move on, you brought up Worf, like who's the best character. I hadn't got around to talk about Worf yet. Again, the thing that Star Trek did, it was most successful at doing. I've said it a million times by now. The thing I did not expect, was not anticipating at all, was ever generating any sort of love or respect for the Klingon culture. And Worf and the Klingons as a whole have won me over. They're fantastic, a unique and fascinating
Well,
subculture within Star Trek as a whole. And yeah, so I mean, Worf, yeah, he's a great character, and
it's
it's a great race. Yeah, go ahead.
so as much as you love the Klingons, maybe you should skip out on the original series because they're not so great. They're not so great
And
there.
don't look the
But
same as we know.
no, they do not. Now, again, that just goes to show you, as I said before, Star Trek is really good at reaching back into their own past and kind of, building on things and in some regard correcting certain things. And I feel like the Klingons is probably their greatest success story of doing that. When we first encountered the Klingons, it would be very easy to say that they were trying to give us a certain stereotype with them when they came out. They are very much kind of this pseudo Russian KGB imperialistic knockoff that we're having to deal with. Because again, this was, during the height of the Cold War and things like that, So then, of course, when we see the Klingons again in the 80s, and now we're 20 years distant in this Cold War esque um, mindset, and where our relationships and dynamics with political powers like Russia and stuff like that are changing for us. Then there also became a need to kind of retool how we looked at this race because we didn't want to keep them walking around as these giant Russian parodies We didn't want to have a show that was now also going to be available in Russia, making fun of the very people that were going to be watching it. So there had to be something else like they did with them. And through the character of Worf, we do see a gradual retooling of them. And then of course with Deep Space Nine, we do there's a Klingon explosion, which really gives a depth and a richness to a culture that they had never
Yeah.
done before. And even for like other races like the Vulcans that are just as legendary and storied with Trek as the Klingons, we never really got the deep dive on Vulcan culture the way that we did on Klingon culture, and that's what. But that would be probably a plus reason to go back and watch the original series because they do a lot with Vulcans there. And most of that does not change over the next 60 years. So what you see is kind of what you get. And I guess it's kind of the terrible thing about boring, stoic, unemotional characters. There's not much room for change there.
Yeah.
And yes, that's correct, Vincent. As Vincent pointed out here in our chat, Chekhov was a Russian character sitting prime on the bridge of the
Right.
Enterprise, which is again another bold statement Star Trek was trying to make about the Cold War and the animosities that we had with Russia at that time. This was Gene Roddenberry's way of saying basically that we would get over it and that at some point we would all be working together. The same is true of having Sulu on the bridge as well. Sulu was a Japanese character, and this was, of course, our way of saying we were going to get past all of our fears of communism and imperialism and so forth, and be
Right.
able to work together. Um, don't know if we really achieved that, but we're certainly. I would say I feel like I guess we're a little bit better off than we were 60 years ago on that end. Now, with Next Generation being such a very popular show and the one that did, kind of bring a lot of us into Trek, we did talk about the best of both worlds being kind of like the pinnacle episode of that show. Are there anything since again you watched this one? Is there anything in um, Next Generation that stands out to you as a particular low point? This is a episode or a notion that was put out there that either they did poorly or you wish they hadn't done at all, or anything that when you think about it, you're like, oh God, that's a crappy episode or character or something along those lines.
I can't remember a move along home type episode. Oh, no, hold on. There
And
was
spoke
that.
too soon.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a while since I've watched TNG, I guess. And there is that one episode, which I have mentioned before. I don't remember it very well. I think it's in season 2, where it's something about Picard is caught in a time loop. And, like, there's this weird version of him that ends up on the ship, and he gets on a runabout. And
Okay.
and like it
I'm
gets
trying to
sucked
remember
through
the
some sort
name
of
of that
vortex.
episode. Yeah, and it's like the blue swirling light vortex monster thing is trying to eat the Enterprise, and there's two Picards
Something.
that
Yeah,
show
there's
up in
super
one.
cards.
Yeah,
I saw that one being like, what the heck is going
yeah.
on?
I think
Um,
that was an attempt at a time travel episode, and they were trying to maintain the mystery for as long as they could, but because they didn't give us enough breadcrumbs to follow along with what the
right,
mystery was, the episode does fall flat. Because even to this day, I don't think it's ever really resolved as to what that thing was. Was it
right,
alive? Was it not? Why was it targeting Picard? Why were
right.
there two Picards? Like none of that is ever really explained. That is a season 2 episode because Dr. Pulaski is on the Enterprise then, not
I remember it
not
being a
Crusher.
season 2 episode.
Yeah.
The episode where Tasha Yar dies because of the weird black ooze, that weird
Skin of
oozy
Evil.
creature, Skin of
Skin
Evil.
of
Yeah,
Evil
that was
dealing
just
with
a
Armus.
strange episode. I feel like I guess Tasha, the actress behind Tasha Yar, was like, I want out, and so they were like, all right, let's make an episode where you die.
So, as far as I know on that, it wasn't so much that she was saying, I want to be like out completely. But like I said, a lot of these actors were new to what Star Trek and television programming was going to be for their career. A lot of them wanted to be movie stars and want to be movie actors, things like that. And so, even though they were doing this show, they were still going out on auditions and things like that. And Denise Crosby was probably one of the more prominent people to, at least initially, come into the fold of Trek. So now, with that being said, of course, she's still doing auditions, things like that, and she was, well received in Hollywood for a while there, and she wanted to go and do other movies and things like that. But of course, her contract stipulated that she needed to be available to a certain degree for Star Trek. Now, these things are going to, of course, clash when are you have to be there every day, 18 hours a day, on the off chance that you're in the episode or you're filmed or whatever, because again, you're supposed to be on a spaceship. So you being able to be gone for 6 weeks or 3 months or whatever it is doesn't make any sense when you're supposed to be in deep space.
Right.
So even if you're not necessarily in the episode, you may be in it for a walk by or whatever it is. So they need you to be on set, dressed and ready to go. This, of course, she could not do and still do movies. So I believe that what she initially did was just ask for a reduction in her character's role, which, again, it's the first season of a show. Ratings are still fluctuating. You're not necessarily the big star for them yet. And this was a time when they could cut ties and suffer very little in the way of loss.
Right.
So they did. Now, of course, this would come back to bite them, many, many, many times over. Ultimately, they did end up finding ways to bring Denise Crosby into the fold again of Star Trek. We see her come back as the half human, half Romulan
Right.
Sela, and then, of course, her character Sela has had new life and then some in a lot of things, a lot of Trek projects since then. Most notably would be the Star Trek Online video game. Her character has seen a lot of extensions, a lot of additions, and things like that. All of it still being voiced, portrayed by Denise Crosby. She's still doing it. And so yeah, she didn't just walk away. She's still there. But if you have any interest in the whole story of what happened with her and things like that. She tells it a lot. So
Right.
you can probably find it on YouTube there where she spoke at a couple of conventions and she talks about her contract negotiations and how that went. I know at one point there was a big blow up on um, X, formerly Twitter, where she called out some people about some things that had happened in those final days leading up to her, final episode. So you can always go and check those out. And it's always fun because those very people that she talks about will also post things and it'll make you think they are the nicest, the sweetest, the most kind and understanding people ever. And then you'll find a link to something where they were just awful. So
Of
so
course.
yeah, it's pretty interesting to
Right.
read, to say the least. Um an episode that was pointed out as definitely a low point for Next Generation is the episode Code of Honor, which was a first season episode. This is the one where there was a need for a particular vaccine to be distributed on another planet, but only this other planet made it. So the Enterprise was required to go to the planet that made it and pick up a lot of it. And this entire planet was inhabited by a race of humans who, as far as we know, as far as we can tell, all descended from people from Africa. And the episode has been just blasted for its severely racist overtones. There's a lot to unpack in that episode, and I do know at one point the episode was seen so poorly that it was pulled from broadcast, and for a while there, you couldn't watch that episode. Um, it's only recently, and by recently I say probably within the last 15 to 20 years, of course, that it's really gotten back into full
rotation.
circulation. So, and it's that, again, the episode is bad. One of the guys wants to seize all the land or whatever, so he needs to kill his wife for some reason to do it, but he can't kill her, so he conscripts Tasha to be the one that fights this ceremonial duel to kill her, which Picard seemingly allows, but then they beam her up and they save her, and it's not a great episode. It's really, really not a great episode.
Season one
Um,
of TNG definitely is a bit rocky at
like
times.
I said, season one was, just one step up from garbage. I mean, you really could have, you really could be forgiven for missing a lot in that episode. It's very slow. It's very plotting. It kind of comes off almost procedural with the way in which they do the beats of the show. And the first episode is the worst offender of that. We've got Picard narrating the majority of it, like we're listening to his captain's log, and it's the
Right.
most deadpan, boring delivery that you've ever heard. I
Yeah.
mean,
Patrick
Jesus,
Stewart
it's
might be a great actor and all, but his voiceover work is not
at
necessarily
least
his
back
strong.
then it was not great. It was not great. It didn't put you
Captain's
to
log.
sleep. Yeah, it didn't put you to sleep because it was soothing and you were just so comforted listening to him. It put you to sleep because it was like the worst lecture you've ever heard in your life, and it would just knock you out. But yeah.
Yeah, that first episode is a two-parter. Is so interesting because the first half of that episode is dominated by the Q introduction, which is
Mhm.
just. I mean, I couldn't when he was first introduced. I was like, "What the heck is this guy? He's a jerk. He's uncaring, won't listen." But I've actually he's grown on me. I know you don't like him.
He
You also
he's
hate him,
he's
but
grown on a lot of people. And no, I don't like Q. I've never
yeah,
liked Q, but I do appreciate Q for the fact that he does elevate the story that they try to tell, because he makes it to where all the stuff that you would consider essential to your life in that moment, he makes all of it meaningless. And so the message is always about something far greater
yeah,
than your trivial existence, hamster wheel
right,
spinning existence. So I've always liked that about Q, but I hate how we have to get there, because it always starts the same way with him being petty, and he's such a
yeah,
child, and he's cracking jokes, and he's just kind of dicking around about the situation until finally someone kind of snaps him into place and is like,
yeah,
what do you want? And it's like when they finally get to that point where they're so exasperated dealing with him, now suddenly he wants to be serious. And once again, a character that, for all intents and purposes, Q could have been a one-off. He could have been in the first season and in the first episode and been done. Never hear from him again. Of course, he pops up several times in the Next Generation. We see him once and only once on Deep Space Nine. Cisco
where Cisco
takes care
gives
of
them a good,
business.
yeah,
Cisco takes
doesn't
care of
hold back,
business, right? And we
yeah,
never see Q again. Um, and then of
on
course
Deep
he
Space
pops
Nine.
up on he pops up on Voyager, where he's also a bit of a menace in other ways. So
Gotcha.
yeah, but again, another character that came out of nowhere and has had such odd staying power for what he is.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
the interesting thing about Q is that he always, as you said, like your hamster real life, he takes you out of it. He does it in such a brusque and jerky way, but like, he does do it in such a way that like it actually is good that he did it because, like, for example, when he takes the Enterprise all the way out to a Borg cube and basically attracts the Borg to attack Earth, it would seem like the ultimate argument that Q would say is that I gave you guys a heads up. I gave you guys time to plan, even though it was devastating when they finally arrived. If you hadn't been warned, you wouldn't have even survived that encounter. So my capricious nature is what saved you from ultimate destruction. Which is such a funny argument. I mean, Q's never made the argument explicitly, as far as I can tell, but that's basically what the argument for him is that all of his
yeah,
omnipotent meddling is actually in favor of whoever gets meddled with.
Right. Well, that argument is definitely made for him later on.
Yes.
It's one of that's one of the things, and even when he shows up in the new series Picard, when he shows up, the point that he makes is that Picard matters, Jean-Luc matters, and in particular, this version of Jean-Luc Picard matters, and it's
Right.
one of those. It's a message that I honestly say will admit I missed the first time in watching it. And he gives a very great speech towards the end about that and what that significance means for not just, the people that Picard influences, but also for Q. And in a way, it's almost like he's talking to the audience, to us as we're watching it, because he's talking about the influence, whether intentional or not, that the character Jean-Luc Picard has had on so many people throughout so many, so many years, so many generations. And
Right.
it's, mild spoiler for you. There is some mirror universe nonsense hijinks that go on, and we're having to deal with this kind of other version of Picard, to a certain degree, in the history of this other version of Picard. And so again, why it's so important that our version, the one that we do know and love of Jean-Luc Picard, why that one is so important.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
Again,
that
I
episode
it's
where
yeah.
he allows Picard to make a different choice in life back when he was at the academy, and how
Hmm.
that totally changes his life trajectory is an interesting
Right,
episode. That's exactly the type of stuff that Q is great at,
right.
asking those hard hitting, infuriating questions that actually get to the heart of something that Q is trying to impart, which is Q really grew on me. I will say he really
Yeah,
did.
like I said, I understand. Like, and again, I have an appreciation overall for the character, but I don't like Q. I just don't, and I don't think there's ever going to be anything. It'll probably take another 60 years before I will like that character.
I just
He would
love it.
have to do a lot more.
Hey Perry, there's a character you're not supposed to like according to the writers. Do you like that character? Nope.
No, mm-mm. No, no, I
this
don't.
is a this is a bad character. Is he a bad character to Perry? He's a
Hey,
bad character.
hey, works like a charm. Works like a charm. You did a
uh,
great job with your
target
writing.
audience, boom, right there.
Mm,
They got you.
they got me.
I love it.
I'm fine with that. I am fine with that. Um, Speaking of characters that I love to hate, what better way to bring up our Deep Space Nine fan favorite, Kai Wynn? We seem to be going on a path here of we're obviously moving our way through all the shows, but yeah, these kind of standouts here. Kai Wynn is awful. Again, one of those. Again, I identified, don't like, no one likes Space Karen, as she's been called many, 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 many times. Um, but before we really get more into her and Deep Space Nine, are there any other characters that stand out like that? Like Q is a surprising reference that you made, but obviously a very important one for Next Generation. Are there other characters like that you can think of that kind of just, without any kind of real context, leap out at you?
In terms of being characters that I
They're
don't
just
like, or
No, just saying they get to you. They made a mark one way or another, good, bad, whatever. They just pop out at you.
it's hard to say. I mean, Q has the benefit of appearing in multiple episodes across multiple seasons, where no other character ever got quite that treatment outside of the cast, or the main
Mhm.
cast. Um, Heck, even the Romulans that show up every now and then, like there's a couple, but they don't get Q's sort of the number of episodes that Q is in. Um, so no, I would say not, but I don't know. It sounds like you're thinking of at least Kai Wynn.
Well, I mean, she's one. Gul Dukat's another. When it comes to not Deep Space Nine, but Next Generation,
Well, I guess yeah, Gul
um,
Dukat counts.
um, Next Generation, a character I always found weird, and it's an episode that I like to watch, and I can't really say why, but it's the episode is called Tin Man, and it features the character of Tam Elbrin, who is a Betazoid like Deanna. And he was a prodigy telepath, in the sense that Deanna indicates that for most Betazoids, they are not born telepathic. Their abilities develop as they develop through childhood and adolescence and so forth. But every so often, you will come across the rare instance where their telepathic abilities are switched on from birth. So Tam is one of these individuals, and because of this, he's suffered from any number of debilitating neurological conditions, which I could imagine would be quite numerous. Think about it. A child is born who has no concept of language or culture or anything like that, and doesn't have an ability to shut out the millions of voices, billions of voices on this planet that he lives on. Yeah, I could see
Right.
why that would definitely mess him up. And so in that episode, he has obviously he's grown up. He's a full-on adult, and he has become Starfleet's go-to when it comes to making first contact with hard to understand races. In fact, he's gravitated towards the harder to um, communicate with, the more he wants that particular assignment. But there was a particular disastrous first contact moment in which Tam was the ambassador contact person go to, and for whatever reason he was distracted, which led to a massacre, basically, and a bunch of Federation officers lost their lives that day. Something that Riker has apparently taken to heart. He shows the most animosity towards Tam Elburn when he's on the Enterprise,
Right.
and yeah, we see Tam bonds with Data. He gives Data another perspective on life, and being different, and how there's nothing wrong with being different. Um, and then ultimately he goes off and he lives with the alien entity that we see them trying to contact later on.
Right.
But I've always enjoyed that particular character, the way he struggled with his neuropathy and still trying to do his job, and also his unique perspective on Data.
Right.
Do you recall that character or that episode at all?
Not very well. I did pull it up on Wikipedia while you were talking to try and remind myself of it. I'm a visual person, so if I saw visuals from the episode, it might trigger my memories a bit better.
Gotcha.
Um, but at the moment, just reading the recap isn't terribly reminiscent. But yeah,
Well, I just like that he told, because like the whole episode is about him being able to communicate with these with all beings, really, whether he wants to or not. And
right,
when he encounters Data, there's nothing for him to read because Data's a machine, basically. And so
right,
in this episode, there's a particular scene where he's talking with Data, and he's having to ask Data questions and get to know him and things like that. And he was just like, how he's so used to being able to get it all instantly of the person, everything there, every thought, every feeling, all of it. And with Data, he doesn't have that. And Data makes the statement of, perhaps there's nothing to read. Perhaps all I am is just wires and circuitry and whatever else. And Tam seems to get a little upset with him in that moment, and he's just like, or perhaps you're just different. It's not a crime. You might just you're a different kind of life form. It's no big deal. Like, you shouldn't feel bad
right,
because you look different, you think different. You're just different. And I just really like the way that he kind of, to Data, vehemently defended Data. And
right,
I've always liked that. I mean, and I think that's why, I do have a little soft spot for Data as well, because there were so many characters that did just kind of dismiss him as this, synth man. He doesn't matter, or whatever. And then he would do something that would, obviously change their mind later on. But I
right,
never viewed him that way. So when others did, it was always upsetting. So
right, right. Okay, yeah. Um, Now we had talked last week about this week in real life, 2024, early September, coincided with the past tense episodes of
yes, yes, it
Space
did.
Nine, and it's already an hour in. I was like, maybe we should talk about those for a quick second, because I rewatched them and listened to our
Yes,
podcast from
So
back
we get.
then.
I mean, we were getting there. We were making our way to Deep Space Nine, and this is
Gotcha.
going to
I'm
be our,
rushing
our
you.
four-way
I'm
in. No,
rushing
it's
you.
it's all right. We got time. We can make this happen. This is
Got
our
it. Got it.
special. This is our all things Trek salute special, whatever. So yes, in Deep Space Nine, we did see the episode Past Tense dealing with sanctuary cities. This is something that we had already talked about once before when the episode came up in season 3, I believe that was, and then we talked about it again last week briefly, because we were hearing things about sanctuary cities, and with the way that politics seem to be going in our country right now, all of that kind of coming to a head. And then of course we were celebrating the anniversary because all of that was supposed to kick off last week. It was what,
August 30th.
Friday or August 30th, 2024 was the day that we saw in the episode. And then of course we had that actual day. So you said that you listened to our previous episode,
Hmm.
and now we were going over it a little bit again. um Two-part question. First, in listening to the previous episode, can you briefly remind us what you said? And then two, do you agree with what you said then versus now? Like having had some time to sit with it and think about it again. So
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely still agree with myself that time travel stories, I like the stories when they stick with the idea of not going back to the past to change the past, but to fulfill the past. In fact, I came up with the idea while we were talking about it, and while we were talking about it, that it would have been interesting if instead of Cisco taking the place of um, Graham Bell,
Gabriel,
uh,
Gabriel Bell.
Gabriel. I did it again because in that episode I kept seeing Alexander Graham Bell, and I just did just now. Gabriel Bell taking Gabriel Bell's spot because he dies, and we need him to fulfill the timeline and have him still be the one who gets the riots named after him and get changes made to history. Instead of Cisco impersonating the guy, which creates time travel issues. Like at the end of the episode, we see a picture of Cisco named as Bell
Mhm.
instead of Bell himself. Um, instead they tried to protect Bell and make sure, or they know he's gonna die. They get to know him, they befriend him, they like him, but he is going to die. They know he's gonna die, and they have to try and like come to terms with that. And you had told me that there's a original episode,
Yeah.
the City on the Edge of Tomorrow, I think is what it's called.
City on the Edge of Forever, which
Forever.
does exactly that with Edith
Yes.
Keeler.
Right.
And they like her, they know her, she's a very influential person, but realizing she has to die for
Yes.
their future to happen. And
Exactly.
and Kirk has to be held back because even
Right.
knowing that, he
Right.
still wants to save her. Yeah.
So what's funny about all that is that I I talked about that and the episode, The Trouble with Tribbles, if I remember the name of the episode correctly. That's basically what they have to do. They have to go and try and keep things happening properly.
So the Trouble with Tribbles was the original series episode. The episode that you're thinking of, though, with Deep Space Nine was called Trials and Tribulations,
There we go. Okay.
Tribulations, which was
Tribulations.
the 25th anniversary of Trek
Right.
episode. Then, yes,
Right. Okay. And that episode, they have to basically keep the original um, villain from going back in time and somehow undoing something or other and keeping themselves from being discovered by the original crew. We get to see
Mhm.
the original look of the Romulans and I'm sorry, the
Or the
Klingons. Excuse me.
Klingons.
Excuse me. Yeah. There are the episode where the Bajoran comes back from the past and he thinks he's the emissary. Well, when he goes back to the past, Kira now has poems from the guy that he went back to the past and he lived, and so he was able to continue writing poetry. And now Kira knows more of his poetry, and she knows that that's not how it originally went. So it turns out that the show has actually been, at least in that episode, consistent with the idea that future events can be changed by the past, but still like it's an amalgamation of both. They still remember what the past originally was and
Mhm.
notice the changes to it. So that's interesting. Um, yeah, I still agree with my overall point. Like what I just said, like I think we both said that we thought the episode was maybe not quite fitting for a two-parter. It could have been fine as just a single episode. Uh, they had to draw it
The
out to make it two
Yeah,
episodes.
the issue with it being a two-parter was the fact that they went too slow on the second part. So it's almost like you had to get geared up again to get into the story when it really should have been a true continuation from where the last episode left off.
Right.
We get a lot of extra stuff with Dax, which wasn't really necessary.
Nope.
And it's one of those situations where as much as we love Dax and we like to see Dax and we like to know that she's and somehow affecting the story, in this instance, she would have been more effective if she had been beamed in with Cisco and Bashir than being found elsewhere.
Right.
And I understand the reason that they did it because they were trying to give us this view of the other side of the society that
Yes. Right.
Bashir and Cisco were trapped in. But it
Right.
was so ineffective and quite frankly boring.
Yeah.
It wasn't the boost to the story that we needed. It was more of a distraction, and
Right.
that's why it
Well, and
suffers.
also the guy who saves her is the super rich dude that just fortunately happened to come
And
across her, and he's smitten with her immediately. And
that is one of the things that 90s shows did so much of that I hate. They would give you the most ineffective milk toast guys, run of the mill dudes who they were just boring. Their only asset in the story was that they either had money or access. They inexplicably had the access that we needed. He's this guy who meets this, for all intents and purposes, homeless woman in a subway tunnel, and he's so smitten with her, he just has to rescue her. It's every BS love story you've ever heard. She wakes up and she's in a mansion in a high rise with these massive windows, and there's this ginormous plate of fresh fruit and vegetables and whatever else for her to ease
enjoy.
into the comfort of the life she's just awoken herself to. And here's this dude who is boring. He speaks real slow and he's soft spoken. He's so gentle and nuanced and kind. And oh, by the way, he's the richest man ever. You just happen to have been saved by the richest guy you've ever heard of ever in
Right.
life.
Yeah.
And oh, do you need access? Not only does he have access, he's the inventor of the thing that you need to get access. So
Yeah.
he's perfect for what you need. It's awful,
Yeah.
awful.
He's a plot device more than anything else. Yeah, and it was funny too. He never gets a resolution in the episode. Like Dax straight up abandons bro without saying a thing.
Yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing. She doesn't give him a. There's not even a moment where
I
where
have
he's
to
like,
go.
maybe we'll see each other again, and she's like, I'd like that or something. Nothing. She's just basically like, I was using you. Bye and
Yeah.
gone. We never. There's never him looking wistfully into the clouds as
Right.
she's disappeared from his life or whatever. Nothing. It's just I hate it. I I hate
We
it.
didn't talk about that the original time, so it's funny that we're talking about it now. We get to revisit the parts we missed to talk about the first time.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's the joy of being able to look back or remember some more things that I hate
Yeah.
about it. But yeah,
But
I mean that just yeah
but
stands out.
the thing that we both really loved at that episode, and you'll remember it because you remember stuff really well. Avery Brooks yelling at the guard in the background because he's a curmudgeonly, doesn't think that anything's worth bothering with. Gets basically is basically daring them to shoot him, and Avery Brooks gets in his face and gives that raw performance that he always does when he's really impassioned. The character's impassioned, so Brooks is impassioned as the
He brings
character.
it. He brings that
Uh,
fire, man.
yeah, it's such. I mean, he's the whole second episode is full of moments where he has to express, anger to keep the other guy from shooting people or being violent, and it's great because that scene where he has to yell at the guard. is the climax of his exasperation. He knows what's supposed to happen, and he's got all the tension of trying to make sure it happens properly. And if he screws it up, he can screw up everything. And so we know that he's not yelling because he's just mad at some guard for being stupid. He's trying desperately to make sure things don't go out of
Yeah.
control. Um, Great
And the guard
performance
and
from
the problem
Avery.
with that, if I remember correctly, the guard is he's that status quo, nothing's gonna change. This is
Yeah,
how it's always been. This is how it's gonna be. And
right,
Cisco is trying to make the point of it won't be. Like you
right,
have to be willing to challenge things. You have
right,
to be willing to stick your neck out and fight for what's right. And he's like, you've got all this ability and you don't use it, and it's not because you truly believe in the status quo, but it's because you're afraid, you're
right.
fearful, you know. Yeah, it's a great a great scene. And once again, it's Trek kind of reminding us too of our own responsibility when it comes to stuff like that. If you don't like it, don't just sit there and say, it's always going to be this way, it's never going to change. Nothing in the history of our society has ever worked that way. If you don't like something, there are like-minded individuals, you need to stand up and say so, and get those injustices taken care of. And I mean that we've got so many great moments in history that are all these revolutionary changes that came because there were people who stood up and said, this isn't right, this is
Right.
not how it's supposed to be, it needs to, things need to change, it needs to be better. And here's Cisco doing that again here for these people in this episode.
Right.
Now we were talking about this because of the fact that we had, even at that time, we were talking about um, the term sanctuary city, which I don't think was like, we were like, contemporarily it has been used, but not in the same way that we see it employed in this episode. So in the episode, when they talk about sanctuary cities, they're really talking about like kind of a city within a city. They've set up these kind of block, they several blocks inside a city have been completely walled off and separated from the rest of the city. And when you're inside these areas, you're there hoping for job training, job placement, home placement, and things like that. But it's quickly become a very
It's a ghetto.
unmonitored, unregulated, yes,
Yeah.
um, um, and people are being taken advantage of and are
Yeah.
dying. And as we see, the one guy's trying to save his son who's sickly, and they're not getting any kind of help or representation.
And
Now,
and Webb dies in the episode, right? The guy whose son they try and
yes,
help. Um, yeah, like they don't. That's one thing they could have done, by the way, is they could have said that in order to save the timeline, they had to change it from the Bell riots to the Webb riots. That unfortunately Bell, his death in them being there changed things, but Webb was the one who stepped up effectively, and that's what changed history. They didn't do that. They chose to stick with the Cisco's face was now the one in place of the other guys. But anyway, you
yeah.
were saying something. Keep going.
Well, no, only to say that, like I said, contemporarily, we have also used the term separation, sanctuary cities, but we've used that as the classification for the whole city. No walls have been erected inside cities blocking off places or anything like that, but we've just said that certain places have become known as sanctuary cities. San Francisco was one of them. There were several cities in California, if I remember correctly, that were classified as sanctuary cities. These are cities where migrant workers, possibly illegal immigrants of all kinds, were flocking to, and there was no regulation for them. There was nothing that was documenting their location, and they weren't also being followed,
well, the primary
tracked, or whatever by immigration.
the well, the primary thing I understand it as is that the local police were not by law were not allowed to cooperate with federal authorities on helping them remove illegal immigrants in that area. So if ICE or a federal organization said we want a retainer on this person who's arrested, the local authorities were by law not allowed, or are not, I should say. It's not like it passed. It's current. They are not allowed to say, "Oh, we just released this person on the streets," or "We're going to release them. Come take them into your custody at this time on this day." Um, they are basically saying we don't. Their reasoning is saying that crimes that are committed in or by, well, basically in uh, immigrant communities, if that person that would otherwise call and report a crime, but they themselves are an illegal immigrant, if that illegal immigrant was victim or a witness to a crime, they wouldn't want to admit such because they might also then
And
themselves be liable to being deported. So it's
so basically,
yeah,
it was a way of saying we're trying to make sure that we are able to keep our streets and so forth safe. We rely on these people to call and report crime and other illegal activity. And if they fear being arrested and possibly deported by ICE, they're going to be less inclined to call us when they really should be calling us.
right.
So that's why they were termed sanctuary
Interesting
cities.
argument. I mean,
It is an interesting argument, and I mean, I don't necessarily feel like I'm qualified one way or another to give, a definitive take on what should or shouldn't be done. I mean, I know initially my thought is if the police are relying on people to report crimes, then that makes sense. If I want my neighborhood to be safe, and if I know that my neighbor may see something and report it, which will stop a crime from happening, stop something or someone from being destroyed or victimized or whatever. I would want them to do so. I want them to feel free to do so, and not feel like, oh, I can't call because if I call and my name gets recorded, there's a possibility that someone may come knocking on my door to drag me out of my house. I would much rather them report the guy stalking the children than be fearful that they're going to lose their home for doing so. So
that's the argument. Yeah.
yeah, but that's it. But we bring it up mainly because not only is this something that we've now seen in Trek, but we're seeing in our own development here, and we always like to make the argument: Are we in the mirror universe, or are we in the on the prime timeline here,
Well,
and
now
how
that it's
things are going?
September of 2024, we know the answer, I guess.
Yeah, we are definitely in the mirror universe, folks. So strap in. So,
Terran supremacy.
oh
Woohoo!
Lord, to seek out new life and conquer it as quickly as possible.
Blitzkrieg of the stars,
Oh
baby.
Lord. So, interesting to note. I don't think you may be aware of this, but in the mirror universe, the Starship Enterprise is not the Enterprise. At least the Enterprise D is not the Enterprise D. It's the name of it is the or the World Razor, as a matter of fact. So there's a whole design for the World Razor where it doesn't necessarily do the saucer separation as we think of it, but the saucer kind of like expands and opens up, and there's like this massive cannon that
Yeah,
drops
nice.
down and it's able to like obliterate planets. So it's just like if we can't bring you into the empire, we'll just blow up your whole planet. So yeah.
I'll
Oh
just that
yeah.
that board game I mentioned I play. Um, with Takes All Day called Twilight Imperium. They use spaceships. There is a function that some of the ships have, which is called bombardment, where that's exactly what it does. You bombard planets and try and blow up the infantry from orbit. So I'm just having a visualization of a Star Trek faction, but it's not Star Trek. It's not the Federation. It's that ship you just called.
Yeah.
Giant cannon popping out.
Oh, it's a fantastic and scary design. Which also, as you may know, I have been playing Star Trek Online, and it is a variant of the Galaxy class that you can purchase. I go back and
Nice.
forth as to whether or not I'm going to,
Oh, Perry,
but
getting
it's
tempted by the mirror universe, are you?
yeah. But it's I found some of the comics online of the Mirror Universe following the World Razor crew, and there's just two of them that I found. But what I was taken by was the design of the characters' looks. Like Jordy's got, he's blind in the other universe as well, but he's got like Borg implants for eyes, and so he's got all this wiring and stuff all around him. And Data has these, like Borgified arms and so forth.
Ooh.
But probably the most outlandish character that draws your attention every time you look at any of these comics is Picard, because not only is he, rocking the full on mirror universe, I'm evil goatee,
Beard. Nice
but he's
goatee.
got
Right, right, right.
he's wearing the uniform. It's a uniform vest, and he's just got the vest on, and he's got all the chest exposed, but the arms are exposed, and he's got the most impressive set of guns you've ever seen. And I'm just like, what are they doing? And like
uh,
in all the pictures, he's doing like the pose, and he's flexing, the arms are out, and he's just huge, man. And I'm like, he is like the poster child for like a dude in his 60s 70s who is completely roided out. He is just
all right. I look.
hulkified with him.
I'm looking at
Yeah,
pictures, and yeah, yep, he's buff as
it's
all get out.
ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Why does
Yes.
he look that way? Who made him look this way? I don't know what was the thought process behind. We're gonna turn him into um, Batista over here from.
Yeah. It's 100%. Yeah, he looks. He looks. I mean, it's pretty fun. It looks like a fun version of the character. I'll say.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then they all have their little um, their looks that have changed. Deanna is basically a femme fatale in the extreme. She's got the very very tight. It can almost be um like latex vinyl looking uniform,
right.
form fitting on her and so forth. So they're just they're fun pictures to look at. I just pulled one up right now. Um, yeah, it's something else. You should go and check them out if you're at all interested. And the comics themselves are not bad. Just don't go into the comic in any way expecting to get um like the Trek that you know. It's
Right.
very, very violent. So just be aware. It's quite violent. So
That's hilarious.
yeah. So
Uh,
like I said, Star Trek has come so far. There is so much beyond the TV shows and the comic books. There's a whole series of books
yes.
like that are ongoing, a whole for every Trek series. If you really fell in love with the original series and you just don't want their missions to end, there are several books you can read, some better than others, of course. So I would strongly suggest you check those out. In fact, there was one series of books, a mini series, I guess, that came out featuring both Kirk and Picard, and it kind of fell into the timeline somewhere around the movie Star Trek Generations, and it's quite complex. I wouldn't even begin to. Um, Kind of try to give you a synopsis of it. But I remember reading those when I was in high school, and it was probably one of the best book series. It was a three-part book series, probably one of the best series that I'd ever read from the Trek um, book series that they do. So yeah, go check those out. I know that right now they just released a new series of comics which are featuring characters from Deep Space Nine, and in one of them, Cisco returns. So I know, spoiler, sorry, but at some point Cisco has to come back. So there you go. I
Mm.
just said that. Sorry. So there. It's out there. My mistake. I wasn't thinking. Now we're getting pretty close here to almost an hour and 30 minutes, but there's still so much Trek to talk about and things that we have not talked about, and it's almost criminal to end it without talking about them. Um, in particular, Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Enterprise. These would be the last two Trek shows to be on air for almost 12 years. After Enterprise ended, we had no Star Trek for 12 years. So with Voyager, of course, this is kind of the show that was looked at as a kind of retooling of the Trek franchise. They were going back to a more episodic format instead of the heavy serialization that we see in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And um, we of course have our very first female lead of Captain Catherine Janeway. So you could almost say this entire show is a pivotal turning point for Trek, with us having this female lead, and not just a female lead in the captain, but we also have a lot of strong female characters that come out of this show that are still having an impact today. Most notably, besides Janeway herself, but the character of Seven of Nine, the Borg, who is deborgified basically in season 4 and
Mhm.
rides the wave all the way home with the rest of the crew for the next 3 seasons. This character does have some new life in the new shows like Picard, and fully becomes, more of a rounded out character. And there has been talk of doing a follow up show featuring um, the new human Seven of Nine. Moving forward from Picard, whether or not they'll actually do it, we don't know. Um, but yeah, since you haven't watched any of Voyager, have you?
Not
Okay,
yet.
so not yet. So we will come back. Hopefully by the next time we do a celebration of Star Trek Day, David will at least be a little bit more informed on Voyager. So I'm not going to belabor us on Voyager too much. Just to say that it's a show that for a lot of people it's polarizing in the sense of you either really like it or you don't. I fall into the category of I really like it. Yes, I do have some problems with some episodes. The Warp 10 turning into lizards and having babies is probably the worst episode, and everybody will agree it's a terrible episode. But there are some other really, really great moments in that show. The Year of Hell episode stands out. Basics also stands out. Resolutions stands out. There's a lot of just really great one-off episodes in this show until you get into the final season, and it's that last push to get everybody home. Um, um, but also kind of seals the deal. Yes, I will agree with our chat here. The show to start your wife or girlfriend on, that has been said before, believe it or not. This seems to be the show that if you are trying to get your significant other into Trek, this is the go to. Women tend to gravitate more towards this show, possibly because there are a lot of, not just a female lead, but more female characters. We have Captain Janeway, Seven of Nine, Belana Torres. These are great characters that all do very different things. So there's not like they're stepping on each other's toes or anything like that. So you get a lot of great dynamics there from these characters that people seem to really enjoy. So yeah, check that out. Then, of course, we have Star Trek Enterprise, the show that is the prequel to everything. This is the show that is featuring the very first ship called Enterprise under Captain Jonathan Archer, set in the 22nd century. It's the first Warp 5 ship, and it's probably the one that. Um, I feel like has now taken the place of being the most underrated. I feel like that spot was held for a very, very long time by Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But over time, Deep Space Nine has gained a lot of support, and it's really come up, and it's so funny. 'Cause just talk about that real quick. There are a couple of interviews with the non-visitor who plays Major Kira, and Avery Brooks, obviously Captain Cisco, where both of them talk about the fact that they were very well aware that their show was not as warmly accepted as some of the other shows, but they both, independently of each other, predict that within 20 to 25 years of their show coming out, that it would be way more successful and accepted than it is when it was airing. And if it's almost like 25 years to the day, that show has had a huge resurgence in popularity. It's often hailed now as one of the best Trek shows. But we'll get to that again later because obviously we're doing that show. Um, Star Trek Enterprise did feature a theme song that had words, much to the chagrin of everyone everywhere, and it has become a series of nearly endless jokes. So the best way to spot a true Star Trek fan is to ask them if they have faith in the heart, and if all color doesn't drain from their face and they stare at you, then they're not a true Trek fan. Because everybody knows if you're asked if you have faith in the heart, you know what's up. So,
Okay.
and that's all I'm gonna say. David, you will get there, and when you hear it, you will understand instantly. It is not a great song. This was not them at their best.
Is this a
Um,
torture prisoners with music blaring kind of in the background
oh,
kind of?
it would definitely work, and both it's both awesome and terrible because when you listen to it, it's the worst thing you've ever heard. But at the same time, if you listen to it enough, it gets in your head. And it's the song you sing when you're really drunk and you're just crooning out your everything. And yeah, these are the words. And it's awful, but glorious. So when you get there, um, let me know. But as I said, it's a show that's become criminally underrated. I feel like there's a lot of great potential with that show, but the show really didn't know what it was going to be about until towards the end of the third season and into the fourth season. Unfortunately, it did not last beyond the fourth season, although there have been, again, several references to the show in other Trek shows, and there has been some talk of doing something to some limited degree with some of the characters in some of the newer shows that are getting ready to come up because of where they're set in the timeline. Technically, theoretically, a lot of those characters should still be alive. So we'll
Right.
see. In fact, if I remember correctly, at the end, Captain Archer becomes he either becomes the president of the Federation or he's the commandant of Starfleet Academy. So he's in there somewhere in that. So, yeah, to say the ending is controversial is an understatement. There are some things that happen to some characters that everybody's like, no. And then, of course, there's the involvement of other characters from other shows that we're just like, don't, yeah, just don't go there. As much as I love you, Riker, you never should have been there. That's all I'm going to say on that as well. Um, so this now brings us to what I now consider new Trek. As I said,
Yeah.
Star Trek went off the air. We didn't have any new shows for 12 years. Excuse me. Until we finally got Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek Discovery also falls into this realm of you either love it or you hate it. And there are a lot of people on both sides who, and I feel like, depending on your day, one group is more vocal than the other. So, um, we're not going to really go into a whole lot there. We are kind of running on some time, and it's now turned into I'm talking all the time, and David doesn't have much to contribute here because he has not seen any of these shows. But I did feel it important to, at least
I
announce
know
them,
more
cover
about
them.
the current Star Trek films than about any of those shows we talked about.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot that we can still talk about in Trek. I didn't realize I suddenly had this intense desire to go over all of it, and so actually, let's not do that because it would turn into me breaking down all of these shows. But I must say, and as I say every time that Discovery comes up, Discovery is a good show. Just like a lot of the other ones, its first season was rocky. But once you get past really like the midway point of the season, the show actually does get better. You just have to give it a chance, and then you also have to realize that, like all Trek before it, it is a product of the times. It's the show that came out at the height of COVID and a lot of death and things like that going on in the world. And this show is kind of a grieving process for that and kind of the rediscovery of our desire to explore and to put ourselves at risk and to be, you know, emotionally available for things. So, um, yeah, all you hard-hearted bastards, like, shut up, go watch the show, stop being so mean. You know, things ain't so bad. Like, go watch it. Um, but yeah, I just want to say for me, and I'll let you have the kind of the end here for us. Star Trek has been a huge part of not just our culture, but my life in particular. And I can't remember a time that I wasn't a fan of this show. This show has gone from being something that I just watched occasionally whenever I was flipping through the channels and was on, to something that I shared with my mother when she was working a lot, and we didn't really see each other a whole lot, but I would stay up just late enough, just long enough to watch an episode with her before going to bed, and going off to school the next day and everything like that. To the show that I looked for and looked forward to, and I followed and had favorite characters, and tried to sneak things of Trek into my everyday life every day for years. It's the show that I base so much stuff off of: how I look at people, how I interact with people, how I treat my friends, my family. All of it can be traced in some way or another to this show, and whether that's good or not, who's to say? I mean, I guess I am. I feel like it's made me more of an open and better person than I would be if I just watched, I don't know, Law and Order all my life. But yeah, I can't imagine not having this show on. It's one that I've started to share with my daughter, whether well, at first she didn't want to, but now she's a little bit more open to it than she was before. Um, so yeah, it really is something that means a lot, not to a lot of people, but especially to me. And getting through some of the harder moments in my life, I can definitely remember times and being like at my lowest and putting on Star Trek and feeling better, at least for the hour that it was on. And I can't think of anything else I've ever had that did that for me. And I'm always very appreciative of that. All right, you say stuff now.
I mean, my history with Trek was minimal at best before you and I were friends. Like I said, I'd seen the J.J. Abrams Trek films, and my dad has said he watched the original series when he was a kid, but he never was into Star Trek after that. Like when I was a kid, it was not something that he ever watched and invited me to join him watching. So it was always something else to know that existed, but never I got into. So it's fun to get into it now and have all this history around it. Um, yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, you don't have to say much or go into it the way that I did. Again, our experiences with the show are different, but that's the great thing about it. Like I said, it's a great, like I have made more friends because of this show than not, and we don't agree on everything. We don't think that every character is the great character. We don't have the same favorite characters or say favorite ships or whatever it is. But we don't have to. The fact that it still comes from this one source is kind of that unifying feature there. And I really enjoy sharing Star Trek with you, with other people, even if it leads to other things. You might not necessarily like Star Trek, but you liked Farscape or Battlestar Galactica or The Expanse or Firefly or any other number of sci-fi shows that I can still be like, I watched those because of Star Trek. I experienced those because this got me there first, and I wanted more from that, genre. So, um, yeah, the show it's done so much, and even to the point where now I get to do something that I never thought that I would ever do, which is I get to host a podcast with a good friend of mine talking about the show that I have loved all my life. So yeah, and I'm going to keep doing it, and even when we run out of episodes of Deep Space Nine, we will find other things to talk about. I promise. We're not just going to drop you all
30
a little
years
bit
from now, you're
listening
gonna
to
find
us.
me in a basement in Perry's basement. We're gonna be
We got a
talking
show
about
to do.
Star Trek.
Wake up. Go take your medicine. We got to do another show.
It will turn on the TV again, or else it. What? I never mind. I couldn't do the quote.
Oh yeah, you
It
were trying to
will.
do your Hannibal quote.
Yeah. Anyway, never mind. Yeah.
Well, guys, I think that will actually do it for us on this longer episode. Yeah, I see him still trying to work it out over there in his
Or
head.
else it
What you
gets
say?
the hose again. That's the problem.
Yes. It puts Star Trek on the TV again, unless it wants the hose again.
That's it. That's what I was trying to basically say. Yeah.
Don't worry, I got you. I can do other references besides
Well,
sci-fi.
I'm at this point. I'm afraid. I'm afraid how quickly you got that. It actually tells me like maybe you would be ready to say that if necessary.
All I can tell you on that front is don't mess up, David.
Your reprieve for today is Battlestar
Mhm.
Galactica 15th watch through.
Oh man, wait till we get to that celebrating those anniversaries because I love that show so much. But yeah,
Yeah.
but as always, guys, you can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to listen to your podcasts. I do it on Spotify, of course. You can reach out to us with any questions, comments, concerns on Facebook, of course. Please remember if you are going to do that, be polite, be kind, and also give us time to respond. We don't check it every day or sometimes even every week, but we do check and we will respond when we see it. So, never fret. You will hear from us if you send us something. That's the only guarantee I can give you. You will hear from us. We will be returning to our regularly scheduled programming next week. This episode will actually come out tomorrow. It'll be released on Star Trek Day. So, for those of you who don't have anything to do on your Sunday and you just want a lazy Sunday where you listen to us go on and on and on for nearly 2 hours about several different iterations of the show you love so much, tomorrow is your day. So look forward to that.
I love how
Um,
people will have heard you say that at the end of that near two
oh yeah,
hours.
let's see who listened all the way through to the end. Who can say,
Uh,
Um, okay, well, for those of you who do listen all the way to the end, the secret word to remember is oranges. There, let's see who brings it up. Oranges. There you go. All right, guys. So until next week, and I tell you what you win for remembering that. Um,
Don't get your
take care
hopes
of
up.
yourself. Right. Well, for now.
All right.
Until next time, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.